Welcome to the very first episode of She Does This for the year. I'm Jordy Lucas and I'm so excited to be with you again. It's 2021, a new year. Thank God 2020 is over. We're shaking things up a bit this year. We'll still be having our conversations with women on how they do it, but I also wanted to have a bit of a segment at the start of each episode where I chat with you ladies about life and the latest from the site. I spent a lot of time over my break thinking about how I could connect more with you all, and this is one of the ways that I want to do that. So if you ever have anything you'd like to hear about, drop us a DM or an email. We love hearing from you all. This week on the site, Candace Warner opens up about how her and her husband David met, how motherhood changed her, and how she feels about the new year. We also heard about her experience on SAS Australia, which was really interesting. Former Biggest Loser trainer Michelle Bridges talks about how staying active with her son is really important to her and why turning 50 made her feel freer than ever. I also spoke with a skin scientist who revealed what causes around 70 to 90% of skin concerns. Let's get to our guest for this week. She owns multiple businesses and is a self-titled fun-trepreneur. Many of you will know her as Spoonful of Sarah on Instagram, where she boasts over 80,000 followers. Here's my chat with Sarah Davidson. Sarah Davidson, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast this week. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I am really well, thank you. It is just so wonderful to clear the slate, start a new year, and get into a fresh mindset. So summer is my favorite time of year, and taking a little break through January, so feeling wonderful.
Lovely. So how was 2020 for you? It was a crazy year. How was it for you as an entrepreneur?
Oh gosh, I mean, how do we even describe it? I still don't think I have been able to articulate it exactly how I mean it, but I think business owners, especially for me, having come from a corporate background and having to unlearn a lot of what served me really well in a legal career in terms of certainty and risk aversion and perfectionism, and having to unlearn all that and embrace the much more spontaneous, faster pace of business, meant that I think a lot of business owners had a little bit of a head start on everyone else in being accustomed to uncertainty and having some practice at being able to still cope with life when you don't know what's around the corner and when you don't have any kind of certainty around your plan. So I think I'm grateful I'd had a bit of a transition in towards embracing uncertainty before we went into the craziness of 2020. But still, I don't think anyone could have really prepared for what it would throw at us. And it was incredibly tumultuous. One of our businesses is a cafe in hospitality. And of course, that closed completely for months and months, and all our staff is like a family to us. And so to not be able to support them through that in the early days was obviously incredibly challenging. But all our other businesses are online based. And if I wasn't already such a huge proponent of embracing the digital world, then after last year, I absolutely wholeheartedly believe it is a wonderful platform that allowed us to continue working and connecting with people, creating the podcast, doing all the book launch stuff through, not being limited and unattached from humanity and connection.
Yeah. And I think it's really shown us what's important as well. Things that, are just trivial, but it's so easy to just sit on your phone and text and communicate through social media, which is so amazing. But at the end of the day, when the human connection was taken away from us, we realized how important it really, really is.
And I also think without realizing it, we're incredibly distracted. It's easy to distract yourself and to have that sense of gratification of being engaged and fully stimulated all the time. And it's actually not, you don't need a lot to find small moments of joy. We're just so accustomed to having so much that we never practice simplicity. And it was really actually wonderful. I think maybe something I had been needing for a very long time, but hadn't allowed myself to do. And it was also the first year of our married life. And we had planned I would say to get on a plane once a fortnight, if not once a week, one or the other of us. So to have a whole year, like, which is incredibly privileged and exciting, but to have a whole year of just domestic bliss,
Yeah.
and to like spend time together that wasn't through a distracting event together was really lovely and difficult, but lovely.
Oh, yeah. There was more bickering going on in our household, I'll tell you that. But it was really nice to be like, we've got a now 15-month-old little girl, and my fiance working from home, he got to witness and spend time with her more than what he would have if he was in the office. So it was actually a blessing in that way as well.
Well, that's the other question. As soon as you get married, everyone's like, well, have you made quarantine babies? And I'm like, do you have any idea what my personal hygiene has been like this year? It has not been a sexy time. Just letting you know.
There's been no waxes for 6 months.
Oh, and also in each other's faces all day, every day. There's no, like, how do you create romance when you're just
mystery?
Like, hi. Like, there's no like absence, even for, a working day, to be like, oh, hey, you're cute. I missed you all day. It's like, hi, I've been with you for like 7 months in a row now. I forgot that I like you.
Tell me more about the book that you managed to release in all the chaos.
Yes. Well, again, so I'm such a big believer in timing. Like, the universe always figures out the right timing, even if you don't, even if your plans weren't necessarily for things to work out that way. And the timing of the book was perfect in two ways. Firstly, I think I've always known I wanted to write a book. Long form writing is something I've always loved, even through my legal career. Like, no matter what the subject matter, using language to communicate and connect with people over whether it be a legal argument or a life message is something I've always really enjoyed. So I think as soon as I had the idea and coined a name for my newfound life philosophy, Seize the A, I was like, it's probably going to be a book. But I didn't get a book deal until a year after I'd started the podcast. And I think that was so perfect, because if I'd written a book a year before, I wouldn't have known half the things. I wouldn't have had time for all the thoughts just kind of crystallize and come into, I wouldn't have had a year's worth of conversations through which to develop the philosophy a little bit more. So it was perfect timing in that sense, that it just came when we just got married. I had a really small amount of time to write it, which works better for me anyway, because I work in small bursts. But at the other end, it was perfect because I was writing all these messages about cleaning the slate, getting off the autopilot circuit, choosing your pathway rather than getting swept up by just momentum and what's next and how am I busy and climbing ladders that later you don't even care about. And by the time it came out, which I never could have known when I first was writing, because I finished it the 8th of January. So it wasn't, Corona was still a distant overseas problem that no one actually really knew about. By the time it came out, many of us were in isolation. So many people had been forced to clear the slate and were sitting in a time where they needed guidance on joy and on conscious choice and on so many messages in the book about, beautiful new beginnings are often disguised as painful endings, embracing discomfort and adversity as a growth opportunity. I didn't know that, everyone's like, oh, how did you know? And I was like, oh, I didn't. I was writing it for a completely different time.
Yep.
But again, I think it came out just when it was as, more potent than it ever could have been. It was a time where people have been forced to stop and think about joy and think about joy separately to productivity and career and achievements and success, and where success has suddenly been reevaluated for the first time in so many years as like it's not the be all and end all. A lot of us haven't achieved much this year and haven't been able to, but that doesn't mean life doesn't go on and there aren't still beautiful things to enjoy. We've come back to a place of thinking about what really matters. And that is what the whole idea of Seizing the A is about, is that the metrics that we use to measure our working lives are important, but they're not our entire identity, even though we let them become that.
Where did Seize the A come from? Where did that idea come from?
my crazy brain. So I love, as I mentioned, like language. I study lots of languages. I've always loved the written word. And I actually had the name idea come up. So Matcha Maiden started off alliterated, and there are lots of puns about, to infinity and beyond, and the community, and injecting a bit of playfulness. And after a couple of years, I realized that on the side of all the business learnings, there'd been this philosophy kind of brewing about my, that was sparked by my own transformation of unlearning one identity, stripping it back and finding the one that was better suited to me. And I'd gone from, I think, seizing the yay and having this like, seize every opportunity, make the most of it, regardless of whether you care about it or like it, or, like it was just intense gratitude and intense thirst for opportunity to the exclusion of like joy or anything else, and move towards more a happiness metric that just one day I was like, it's not seizing the day, it's seizing the yay. That's what I'm seizing now, is the joy rather than just the opportunity in and of itself. And lawyer me registered the business name. I think I have the date. I think it was like March 2017. And I didn't have anything to do with it or to use it for another year and a half. So it brewed. And I know we like to rush to the end and get the instant gratification of like a destination, but I've learned to take things in steps, and they'll come when they come. Like things will work. Again, the timing thing. A year and a half later, I was like, this material that's the behind the scenes stuff that it's not appropriate to share on Matcha Maiden, that you don't get your orders this week because I'm having a bad period in the fetal position. Like, can't put that on the business page. It has to live somewhere else. And Instagram is a very instantaneous platform that doesn't allow the deeper conversations that I was having and wanting myself. So the idea for a podcast came up, and then I thought, oh, I've got a name already. It's just been sitting there unused. And I think it all kind of came together in such a beautiful way that I knew that something was brewing. The podcast came up, and then when I was ready to make that into a longer form book, that became the next iteration of the sort of philosophy. And I think you have to be really stubborn about your goals, but so flexible about the method. And we get really stuck on like, I planned it this way, so this is how it has to be. But actually, if you're really fluid around what things are going to look like in the detail, you allow better plans than the one that you maybe had to kind of arrive.
So tell me about taking a step back from being a lawyer to becoming a fun-trepreneur.
I'm a massive dog.
So I guess when I look at people like yourself, I sort of see you as more of an online personality as opposed to an influencer, because I feel like influencer has a bit of a negative connotation to it sometimes. But you're recognized across multiple different brands that you've created. So tell me about when you sort of realized that you could make a living out of these opportunities and these businesses, and then stepping back from your career as a lawyer to make that happen.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. It does have a weird negative connotation, even though I don't know why, but So I think looking back, there's no short way for me to tell this story. I try, and it always ends up blowing out. So apologies in advance. I was adopted and born in an orphanage in South Korea, adopted when I was 6 months old, and brought up by my incredible family, but also white country bumpkin Caucasian family. So grew up on dairy farms. I've always had like this weird, interesting, unique cultural heritage. But I think that background has always instilled in me the idea of sliding doors moments and how differently things can turn out, but for one small thing happening. And that's meant I'm always incredibly grateful just to be here, like bare minimum, before any of the opportunities. Just being in this country made me feel so lucky. So I've always had this overachieving, like intense need to make the most of every opportunity so that I don't kind of waste this chance that I've been given to have a wonderful life. And I think law came out of not knowing what I wanted to do, but going like I go balls out on everything, going really hard at the nerd side. And then I've always had that arty-farty side as well. So I do 55 million extracurricular activities and school. And I always have needed to know that I'm making the most of everything.
Yeah.
And having a lot of interests actually almost makes it harder to choose a pathway, because what's consistent with lots of different interests? Everything. There's not a clear, like, oh, you should do medicine. Like there's no obvious pathway. So law was more like a way to make the most of the fact that I ended up getting a good score. I didn't know what else to do. And it allowed me to delay the decision further and further, because it kept more doors open rather than closing them. And as soon as I got into a really good law firm to start my career. And as soon as I got there, I got so swept up by the gratification of success. Everyone thinks you're successful when you work in a law firm, and you're kicking goals and wheeling and dealing, and there's like champagne popping, and you're working long hours and wearing a suit. And it's very satisfying to a certain part of my personality, which loves achievement. And so I was, straight away like, okay, there's this ladder. I want to climb it. I want to do really well. I want to learn as much as I can. I applied for all the opportunities overseas. And the scary thing to me now is that I never hated it. Many people leave corporate because they're desperately unhappy, but I actually really thought that I was doing what I was supposed to do. And because I wasn't bad at it either. I was like, I think if we're good at something, we think, well, I have to use this skill. And so the second big sliding doors moment was the infamous happy accident of going to Rwanda, of all places. My now husband has a creative agency that supported a big charity expedition that supported a school that we got to spend some time in. And it was only once I got there that two things happened. Firstly, I had this big revelation about happiness, because I expected to think, oh my gosh, look at all we have where we are. How privileged are we? How poor are these children? But actually they were happier than any children I'd seen back home, with a leaf for 12 hours, or the, community would break into song because they couldn't contain the joy that they felt. And I was like, why are they so happy? And why are we so stressed about all the things that we're creating for ourselves? And that was the first even inkling that success and happiness were not the same thing. That was really overwhelming and confusing, but that planted the seed. And the next thing I brought home was a gut parasite, which was horrible.
Oh, beautiful.
It was such a fun time, The first 5 kilos, I was like, that's a great way to lose pounds. And then the next 10 just progressively got really, I'm 12-year-old boy body already, like quite small, didn't have it to lose, and totally ignored all the signs. Was like, I'm eating my broccoli, I'm spin class, 5 a.m. every day. Like, I'm healthy. What is this? How rude.
Yeah.
And obviously life teaches you lessons over and over until you learn the lesson. I didn't learn the lesson, and I burnt out into adrenal fatigue and collapsed at work, which was also a fun time.
Oh.
And it was in that process of being banned from coffee because my body couldn't handle it, needing some kind of legal substance to keep me energized, that I had to revolutionize my whole relationship with well-being and what looking after yourself actually means. It's not superficially just kale smoothies and gym. It's sleep and rest and care and nutrition and just being kind to yourself and taking breaks and all the things I was like, what are these words that you're saying to me? I think I speak English, but I don't understand what you're saying. And in the process of finding a healthier form of caffeination, I discovered matcha powder. Got sent to the firm's headquarters in Hong Kong once I got back to work. It's everywhere in Asia, and not the buzzword that it is in the West.
Yeah.
And it was this miracle caffeinated powder that is much gentler on your body, gives you energy over multiple hours instead of just like the spike and crash that you might get from coffee. But unlike kale and spirulina, it doesn't taste like foot. So I was like, why has no one discovered this amazing powder? But the health food market was booming. Like everything was geared towards efficient nutrition and on the go, cool branded health food products. Like everyone, if you're open-minded enough for spirulina, you should be open-minded to any powder.
Yeah.
So my husband and I, in our own selfish search for an option, ordered a bulk amount of powder that was far too much for any individual human, and decided as a complete hobby, side hustle excuse to spend more time together to sell some of it.
Yeah.
And I get goosebumps now to think that if I hadn't had all those random, completely unrelated steps that interrupted that autopilot circuit that I was on, I would never have had the contrast of seeing, as soon as I started doing logos and design and copy and community building and creative arty-farty things again, I was like, I'm sparkly.
Yeah, this is
And
filling my cup.
and I haven't been sparkly Sarah in years, but I didn't know that I hadn't been sparkly Sarah because I hadn't seen anything to kind of jolt me into that realization.
Yeah.
So now that is why one of the biggest parts of CCA is being absolutely desperately passionate to help other people interrupt their own autopilot circuit and maybe even choose to go back to the exact same life that they have, but choose it, not just end up on a conveyor belt that ends up getting them there by default.
Did you already have a presence on social media prior to starting this business, or did it all just kind of evolve at the same time?
Yeah, so I had like maybe 32 followers, mad flex.
Yeah, so cool.
Yeah, and it was me taking photos of my breakfast, like very unaware of the social landscape, and used Instagram for all the filters and didn't know that it went on a feed. Like I just was a bit I loved it, but I didn't have any kind of profile, and it was a much less complicated landscape as well. So once we did start, the equation of effort and certain things around timing and frequency was a lot more straightforward to building an audience. So we were able to very quickly build, I think we had 10,000 followers by the time we launched. So we had a critical mass to sort of say, like, you've been waiting for this green thing that's coming, you know, it's health related and consumable, and this is what it is. And we were so fortunate with timing that the Kardashians and Victoria's Secret Angels were drinking matcha. So everyone had seen it.
So you could capitalize on that.
Yeah, but no, they weren't drinking a brand of matcha. They were just drinking it like sugar. It was generic. And no, there was actually no one really in the world who'd made it a branded item. And so we just kind of slid into that nice, perfect market conditions. And it sold out in a week, to the point where we didn't keep the suppliers' details because we're like, well, we're never going to need them again. Like we've got 1 million serves. Like who's going to run out of that?
Wow.
To now, that was 6 years ago. And every moment since then was a random idea just being launched in perfect circumstances to explode. And then we rode the wave for the next 6 months. It was another 6 months until another competitor even popped up.
Yeah.
And by that time, we had such a hold on being associated to the product so much that when people drink it in Starbucks, they think it's matcha made in matcha, even though obviously it's not. But I'm like, yeah, what a great collab we locked in there. That's amazing. Which is awesome.
Yeah. So what's it like working with your husband, who was obviously your boyfriend before? I often wonder how the dynamic goes and the balance between when you are working and then when you switch off and you go back to being just husband and wife, or do they constantly intertwine?
A bit of both. I think if you can make it work, and some couples operate much better when they do have very separate careers. And because we came from opposite worlds, it was bumpy to suddenly be in the same landscape. But if you can make it work, it is the most fulfilling and rewarding thing, because you are working on a goal together, and everything that happens for your future together. So it's been incredibly rewarding and exciting. And that overlap is wonderful because we do get to be in each other's worlds and each other's work. But the first, I reckon, 2 or 3 years were incredibly challenging. You have to fall into the areas where one of you is stronger and one of you is weaker and divide it, rather than all of you doing both. That's just overlap. And we didn't know who was stronger at what because we'd never done it before.
Yeah.
You take liberties with a business partner who's a friend or a loved one that you would never take with a third party in terms of feedback. Like, that's a really terrible idea, Nick. I hate it. Like, you would never say that to someone else. So, but then you also wouldn't take it as personally from someone else, because you're a couple. The communication element took a really long time. But once we smoothed that out, and I think it took longer because we were so overwhelmed by how quickly it all happened, and we were both still working our other jobs, so there wasn't a lot of space to work it out. We just kind of had to do it. Once we worked out how to divide our roles up, we made a corporate chart for the two of us, all the departments, but allocated which one, who's boss of which, so that someone has the ultimate word and we never get kind of gridlocked on something.
Yeah.
Who's going to take care of what, there's no overlap, how we're going to communicate with each other, and then created boundaries, which sounds so obvious, but took us about 3 years to actually do, where this is work time. These are the rooms of the house that are work places. And this is date night. And this is us, not on our laptops. And this is weekend and this is weekday. Like there was none of that at the beginning. It was all such a blur. But once you have those parameters in place, now it operates amazingly. You know, obviously isolation kind of threw all of that into disarray again, and we had to learn all over again. But like anything, it's just communicating about it rather than just trying to push through and waiting for it to solve itself. It took a lot of effort and time, but now it's really wonderful.
So you run several businesses. You're across sort of your personal brand, Seize the Yay, Spoonful of Sarah, Match Maiden. How do you maintain balance and giving your energy across each of the brands? Like, do you dedicate time to each brand each day, or how does that work?
Not well a lot of the time. I think it's worked out well because they didn't all start at the same time. They aren't all growing at the same pace, and they all require very different things. So Matcha Maiden was able to be our main focus for the best part of 4 years. That was, we were, you know, Nick and I were the only two partners and staff really for so long that was a clear priority. Matcha Milk Bar, we have two business partners who are brothers who are hospitality heavyweights. They're incredible at what they do. So our role was again, like between Nick and I, between us and them, the roles are very clearly delineated, and it was not easily, but it was not too difficult to work out what our workload would be when we're needed, what times of the year, like around new menu development or launches, and physically being in there every day was only about the first 6 months to a year anyway.
Yeah.
So managing those two between each other, and I could do a lot of Matcha Maiden work from Matcha Milk Bar because they do interrelate. They are in similar like food, dining, you know, health and wellness industries.
Yeah.
Adding the personal brand and podcast was the first big shift in having something new that needed a lot of time, whereas Matcha actually started to need less time because it was more structured and systemized. And that then added having all three was a bit of a challenge. But I kind of see everything in life as a jigsaw puzzle, and you're just constantly moving the pieces that don't work and refitting the ones in that do. So in the beginning, it was a bit of a juggle.
Yeah.
You have to be incredibly organized with your time management and much more realistic than I am about how many hours you have in a day and how long things are going to take.
Yeah.
But if you're just constantly tweaking and shuffling, and I make a lot of lists and in a matrix, not just of like 1 to 10, but what's urgent and important, what's not urgent but important, what's urgent but not important, and then what's neither.
Yeah.
And that also helps prioritize, because your businesses will need more or less of your time, more like sooner or later than the others will. And if you just work out what needs to be done, you can get into a good flow where some days are all CCA, some days are all Matcha Maiden, some weeks are all one, some weeks are all the other. And it's that dynamic nature of workflow that I actually really like. But I get it wrong all the time, just saying.
Oh, yeah. Like all the time I get it wrong. And I think that's so important as well, to acknowledge that you're not doing it all. You can't be everywhere at once. You have to set boundaries. That's something that I've learned as well, like setting boundaries and saying no to opportunities sometimes is really difficult.
Absolutely. And my biggest learning over the past year was I thought I'd learned everything about balance when I learned to say no to things that I don't really want to do. And it's weird as humans that we have to learn to say no when we don't want to do something, but obligation and the need to, do the right thing always comes into play. But what's even harder is saying no to things you do want to do that just don't fit. And maybe once upon a time, the bigger, more amazing opportunities were fewer because life was slower and it was easier to just only say yes when you want to. But now there's enough stuff that you want to do to fill in 5 lifetimes or 10 lifetimes. So saying no when it's actually something you really want, that's really hard because you do have to be discerning or you ruin your ability to enjoy any of those things that you want to do. And I'm still terrible at that because, people often say, like, listen to your gut, listen to your body. If it's a good opportunity, your gut and your body will say, do it.
Yeah.
But the rest of your schedule is saying, when are you going to do that?
So obviously with multiple businesses, you need to be productive. How do you set yourself up in the morning for a productive day?
Oh, good question. I find that because the nature of the middle of the day and the middle of the week is so unpredictable, that the morning is where I really get routine and where I have a little bit more control over my time and can set myself up in a good headspace. I used to roll out of bed and just get on my phone, and then straight away I'd be pulled into whatever the day brought without orientating myself into the day. And now I find that, like, I'd skip breakfast and I just like rush to the next thing and be pulled by what was urgent and never think about, like, is that actually important?
Yep.
Now I find giving myself like a little bit of time to meditate. I meditate every morning. I have quite crippling anxiety, and the biggest way to manage that has been with twice daily meditation, which sounds so woo-woo, but actually is incredibly beneficial.
Yeah.
I also eating regularly has, like, it sounds so silly, but when you have no structure and you're not in a workplace where it's like breakfast, then you have a lunch break, then you have dinner break, like, it's actually been really important to me to make sure my brain is fueled really well. So I have a really big breakfast and then I have snacks always. Like, your brain is powering through fuel all the time. And I would often eat and then just forget for the rest of the day, particularly when I was writing the book. So I need like healthy, good, go-to, easy snacks to grab a hold of. I actually have snacks on my desk for the podcast. I was like, can I eat on a podcast? Is that weird?
What are they?
Belvita's coconut bites. They're new, gluten-free. I'm gluten tolerant, nut-free, prebiotic fiber. They are so delicious. Let me show you. They're like so. Oh, and I've got these as well. They've got new bakes. They're absolutely delicious. And being a snacker, I'm such a snacker. I can't just grab whatever's there because I'll eat literally anything. So my new morning strategy, because the mornings are the busiest part of the day, is to have a Belvita bake and a bag of bites in my handbag, in my car. It's like my lipstick, like my chapstick. I have one in the car, in the house, in the office, on my desk. Like,
oh my God, I'm the same everywhere.
Amazing. And also I used to, so this is another part of the jigsaw puzzle. I used to do what everyone else did because, like, we try lots of different life structures on for size and see what works. And I used to think like I had to set up my day by exercising in the morning because everyone exercises in the morning. Like, that's, and sometimes I do, but I find like if I do my morning routine, meditate, don't look at my emails until I sit down and eat, do my to-do list and then get into it. I need a couple of hours to knock some things off the list before I feel good to exercise. And then I'm a middle of the day exerciser because I break up the two sort of shifts of work and then feel fresh in the afternoon rather than getting that big slump where I would literally eat all the bag of these snacks and be wondering why I still didn't feel like I haven't had a breakout. So I do a big morning shift and then I try and exercise in the middle of the day that like kind of really pulls your brain out of work, then start fresh and do like a second part of the day. And then I try and put in a bit of a, Nick and I try and put in like a end of the workday boundary at dinner. We've got work spaces at home. We try and not go back to them. We might do a few more emails and work on, like, how you can categorize like brain intensive work and then just like foofy admin that you can do chilling. That's what we're doing.
So we had some listener questions as
Oh,
well come through. Now, this one I think might be from someone who is perhaps a newer follower of yours. They're asking how you and your husband met. Was it love at first sight?
well, we've been together for 11 years, so don't
Wow.
judge 11 years ago me because it was a different time. Um, People always expect we're going to have this beautiful like love story, and we met in a nightclub. So it
Yeah.
was class A.
Which nightclub?
Rock House.
Oh my God, yes.
So Nick used to be a partner in Baroque.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we actually met quite a few years before we started dating, but very, you know how on the scene back then, like you knew people's names and he kind of had them on Facebook, but you didn't actually know them. And he used to sneak me in the back door when I was underage, and like it was a fun time. And then, but we were both in long-term relationships. And then years later, I think he did what is now like the then version of the modern day slid into my DMs when I was on Facebook chat. And just like randomly, I was studying for one of my uni exams and we just started chatting, and we're such nerds, which is how we've ended up lasting and becoming business partners and going through, you know, having such a beautiful relationship, is we both pretend that we're really cool. So in the clubs, we were like, you know, really cool and out there and doing our thing, but we're so nerdy and lame that we ended up having these conversations to get to know each other better, where we would send each other the alphabet and one thing about us for each letter of the alphabet. And we sent like 7 or 8 alphabets each back and forth. I still have the messages. I got them out for our wedding last year.
Oh, that is so cute.
Hysterical. It's not cute. It's so lame and embarrassing. But I think even in those conversations, we were both like, we will never find anyone else who thinks
as weird as us.
Yeah, right. Like that quote, Dr. Seuss quote about falling in mutual weirdness. It wasn't love at first sight. It was mutual weirdness at first sight. Yeah. And that's a stronger foundation.
So another question we had was, how do you stay motivated when you work for yourself?
That's a really good question. And it is difficult. My biggest challenge, honestly, until 2020, I would say, was how to manage the motivation. So going from like manage it as in having too much and calming down rather than not having enough motivation, because going from something that was blah, as we've said, to something I love passionately, but also where every minute of effort goes to a direct response at the other end, and you can see more clearly, as opposed to when you just have a job and you don't get performance reviews or have bonuses or anything until certain milestones. Every minute I would spend had a clear result in the business or the community growth or sales or whatever. I had too much motivation and I didn't take a day off or an hour off for like 4 years when we first started, and went harder than I did in corporate and then burnt out again, which is so backwards because I moved into wellness to be well. But then there have, of course, been periods where because you overdo it, you do lose all motivation. And it's sort of like, if I just went at 80% sustainably, I wouldn't have done the 120 to 0 kind of shift.
Yeah.
So I think it's partly not overdoing the motivation so that you don't lose it altogether when you just have too much and just get burnt out. And in those moments where you do completely lose the ability to like start yourself and get going when you're exhausted, or where particularly when something's gone wrong or sales aren't going well or you're having a dip, like it's such a volatile emotional experience to run your own business. You just, you want to fail, you want to close it down. You're like, it's over, I've got no customers. Like, if this is over, but that is business. It's a roller coaster, like literally a roller coaster of emotions, and success is up and down all the time. And I think building a resilience against that in your moods is so important, and to not be pulled in every direction that your business goes, because it's always going to be unstable. Like that's part of the experience.
So the last question that we have, which I thought was really interesting, and they've used the influencer word, but who are your friends in the influencer space? And I'm using influencers in inverted commas. And how do you keep it real in that world?
So second question first. I think that you set the tone that you then have to maintain. So if you set the bar really low,
Yeah.
it's a pleasurable place to be. Like, once upon a time, I was a lot more curated. And even when I was being real, I was still curated about the real and really overthought like the captions. And
Yeah.
I have so many friends in the influencer world. And as much as it has a weird negative connotation, actually, it's been an incredibly expansive platform to connect with people all over the world through common interests and translate a lot of those friendships into real life, or solidify and deepen the friendships that you already have in real life. And because you kind of put all your beliefs and values and interests on show, it's kind of easier to hunt out the people who have common interests with you.
Yeah.
And I have made so many incredible friends through the platform. And then also not just influencers, but influencers with podcasts is like a narrower subset. So the Shameless Girls, Gemma Watts from Glow Journal, like there's so many people who we are at the same events, and we end up doing a lot of the same in real life events and, shows or whatever, means that there's just a wonderful community. The business community has also led to so many connections online that then translate into real life when you go and hear a speaker, speak together in person. Business Chicks is incredible for that. I've made so many amazing friends who I've connected with first online and then met them in real life and translated that into a beautiful friendship.
Sarah, we've covered so much. Thank you so much for your time, and all the best for an amazing 2021. I've got good feelings. It's going to be amazing. Thank you so much. Well, we hope you enjoyed the first episode of She Does This for 2021. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite platform and leave us a review if you're loving what you're hearing. Stay in touch through the website or on socials. Just search She Does This. Have an amazing week.